It's February 14th, 2000, Valentine's Day. While most families are fast asleep, a 9-year-old girl named Asha Degree quietly slips out of her warm bed in Shelby, North Carolina. Outside, a violent thunderstorm is tearing through the night. Rain is pounding against windows. Lightning is splitting the sky. Any rational person would stay indoors. But Asha doesn't. She grabs a few belongings, steps into that terrifying storm, and walks into the darkness. She will never be seen alive again. What happened next would become one of the most baffling missing persons cases in American history. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. 25 years later, DNA evidence has just pointed investigators toward a local family, and the revelations are absolutely shocking. My name is your narrator, and today we're going to uncover the truth about what really happened to Asha Degree. This isn't just another cold case story. This is about a little girl who made a decision that night that defies all logic. A decision that would haunt an entire community for decades. But before we dive into the new evidence that's turning this case upside down, let me take you back to that stormy night in February 2000, because understanding what Asha did requires understanding who she was. Asha Degree was everything you'd want in a daughter. She was responsible, obedient, and deeply loved by her family. Her parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, had raised Asha and her older brother O'Brien in a close-knit household where rules mattered and safety came first. This wasn't a child who acted out. This wasn't a troubled kid looking for attention. Asha was the type of girl who followed instructions and never caused her parents to worry. That's what makes February 13th so haunting. The Degree family had spent a normal evening together. Asha and O'Brien had gone to bed around 8 p.m. in the room they shared. Their parents checked on them around 2:30 a.m. during the night. Both children were fast asleep in their beds. Everything seemed perfectly normal. But sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., Asha made a decision that would baffle investigators for the next quarter century. She got out of bed, packed some belongings into her backpack, and walked out of her house into one of the worst storms North Carolina had seen that winter. When Harold and Aquila woke up that morning to get the kids ready for school, Asha's bed was empty. Her backpack was gone. Some of her clothes were missing. But there were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. The door wasn't even left open. It was as if Asha had simply decided to leave. The immediate search began frantically. Family members, neighbors, and local police scoured the area around the Degree home on Oakcrest Drive. They called out her name. They checked every possible place a scared little girl might hide. But Asha was nowhere to be found. Then the first breakthrough came. Around 4 a.m. that morning, multiple drivers on Highway 18 reported seeing a small figure walking along the roadside. The descriptions were consistent. A young African-American girl wearing light-colored clothing, possibly white or light green. She was walking south on Highway 18 about a mile and a half from her home. One trucker, Jeff Ruppy, was so concerned about what he saw that he turned his rig around to get a better look. But when Asha saw the headlights approaching, she did something that still gives investigators chills. She ran. This little girl, who should have been relieved to see help coming, instead fled into the dense woods alongside the highway. That was the last confirmed sighting of Asha Degree, but it wouldn't be the last time her story would shock the world. For 17 months, the case went cold. Investigators followed every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, and searched countless locations. The FBI joined the investigation. Rewards were offered. America's Most Wanted featured the case, but Asha seemed to have vanished without a trace. Then in August 2001, construction workers made a discovery that would reignite the investigation and provide the first real clue about what happened to Asha. About 30 miles north of Shelby, in Burke County, workers found something buried in a remote area. It was Asha's backpack, carefully wrapped in a plastic garbage bag and hidden under brush and leaves. Inside that backpack, investigators found items that belonged to Asha, but also something else. Something that didn't make sense. There was an undershirt that didn't belong to her. A white undershirt that would become crucial evidence 23 years later. For decades, that undershirt remained a mystery. DNA technology wasn't advanced enough in 2001 to extract useful information from the degraded sample. But science evolved, and so did the investigation. Now here's where this case takes a turn that nobody could have predicted. For 25 years, investigators and amateur sleuths have theorized about what really happened to Asha. But new evidence suggests that the most compelling theory might actually be the truth. The theory goes like this. Nobody knows exactly why Asha left her house that night, but whatever made her decide to leave wasn't linked to her disappearance. Think about this carefully. At 9 years old, children sometimes make impulsive decisions that seem completely irrational to adults. Maybe Asha was feeling rebellious that night. Maybe she was empowered by some childhood confidence that made her believe she could handle being out in that storm. We know she was a good kid, but even good children sometimes try being rebellious when they're upset about something. They leave the house thinking they can manage on their own, not understanding the real consequences of their actions. When you're 9 years old, you don't fully grasp how dangerous the world can be. So Asha left her house for reasons we may never completely understand. She walked along Highway 18 for some distance, which is where those motorists spotted her in her light-colored clothing. But here's where the theory becomes tragic and explains everything that followed. Eventually, Asha may have stepped onto the roadway, either trying to cross or simply walking too close to the center line in the storm conditions. And that's when she was accidentally hit by a car. But not just any car. According to this theory, the vehicle that struck Asha was driven by 13-year-old Annalee Dedman, and she wasn't alone. Russell Underhill was with her. In September 2024, everything changed. Police announced they had identified DNA on that mysterious undershirt from Asha's backpack, and it led them to a local family that had been living just 4 miles from where Asha was last seen, the Dedman family. Roy and Connie Dedman operated care facilities in the Shelby area. They had several adult children, including daughters Lizzie Foster, Sarah Dedman Capel, and Annalee Dedman. In 2000, the family owned property on Cherryville Road, just 4 miles from where Asha was last spotted on Highway 18. But here's what makes this case even more complex. Also found in that backpack was DNA from Russell Underhill, a man who had been a resident in the care facilities operated by the Dedmans. Underhill died in 2004, but his connection to this case was about to become crystal clear. Police discovered something that changes everything about how we understand that night. The Dedman daughters, particularly Annalee, who was 13 at the time, would regularly transport residents back and forth from the care facilities in a 1970 green Rambler that the family owned. This wasn't unusual. It was part of how the family operated their business. Now think about this scenario. If Annalee was transporting Russell Underhill somewhere that night in February 2000, and she accidentally struck Asha while driving in those terrible storm conditions, what would a 13-year-old girl do? She would panic. Completely and utterly panic. A 13-year-old who has just accidentally hit a child would be absolutely terrified. The natural instinct would be to help the victim, but also to avoid getting caught and facing the consequences. If Asha was still alive after being struck, she would likely be crying, screaming in pain, maybe calling for help. This would create an urgent need to get her away from the roadway where other drivers might see or hear what was happening. So Annalee and Underhill would have put Asha into the car. This physical contact, lifting an injured child into a vehicle, would easily transfer DNA evidence that could be detected decades later with advanced forensic technology. The close quarters inside that 1970 Rambler would mean DNA from all 3 individuals would intermingle on clothing and surfaces. But how did Annalee's DNA end up on an undershirt that didn't belong to Asha? This is where the cover-up theory becomes crucial. The Dedman family may have deliberately added some of their own items to Asha's backpack before hiding it. By throwing in one of Annalee's undershirts, they could confuse investigators if the backpack was ever discovered. It would muddy the waters and potentially throw police off their trail. After the accident, Annalee would have driven straight to her family's property with Asha and Underhill. Once there, her parents Roy and Connie would have become involved in what happened next. As the police warrant later stated, adult assistance would have been necessary to help cover up the crime. This aligns perfectly with what investigators now believe occurred. The Deadman parents helped their 13-year-old daughter conceal what had happened that night, whether Asha died from her injuries sustained in the accident or was killed to prevent her from identifying Annalee as the driver who struck her. It's crucial to understand that when law enforcement refers to this as a homicide investigation, that doesn't necessarily mean the death was intentional murder. Homicide is a legal term that simply means one person caused the death of another person. It can be accidental, like vehicular manslaughter, or it can be intentional murder. The evidence suggests this tragedy may have started as a terrible accident that spiraled completely out of control. The location where Asha's backpack was found, 30 miles away in Burke County, makes perfect sense in this context. The Deadmans would have wanted to dispose of any evidence as far from their property as possible, while still being within reasonable driving distance of Shelby. Burke County would have been a logical choice for someone trying to hide evidence without traveling so far that it would seem suspicious. The meticulous way the backpack was wrapped in plastic and carefully hidden under brush and leaves shows this wasn't a panicked, hasty disposal. Someone took significant time and effort to ensure the backpack would be protected from weather and difficult to discover. This level of planning and forethought suggests adult involvement in the cover-up, which perfectly aligns with what investigators now believe happened. In February 2025, police took their investigation to the next level by issuing warrants for the cell phones of Roy Deadman, Lizzie Foster, and Sarah Deadman Capel. What they discovered in those text messages was absolutely damaging to the family. The messages appeared to show family members discussing their involvement in Asha's disappearance and their ongoing need for silence to avoid facing consequences. If you're finding this investigation as compelling as I am, and you want to stay updated on every single development as this case unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to tell you next is the most shocking revelation in this entire case. But the most explosive evidence came from an unexpected source. A witness came forward who had been at a party years ago with Lizzie Foster and Sarah Deadman Capel. According to this witness, during the party, an intoxicated and emotionally distraught Lizzie was overheard making a statement that changed everything about this case. She said, "I killed Asha Degree." When these words came out of Lizzie's mouth, her sister Sarah immediately tried to silence her, shushing her and attempting to stop her from saying anything else. But it was too late. The truth had been spoken aloud, even if it was only in a moment of drunken vulnerability and emotional breakdown. This witness waited years before coming forward with this information, but when he finally did, he was absolutely certain of what he had heard. Law enforcement administered a polygraph test, and he passed it, lending significant credibility to his account of what happened at that party. The investigation didn't stop there. In April 2025, law enforcement made their most dramatic and visible move yet. Lincoln County Sheriff's Police, the FBI, and North Carolina State Police descended on a former school property near Cherryville, North Carolina, conducting what appeared to be a massive evidence recovery operation. The property was the old Northbrook Consolidated School, which the Deadmans had purchased in 1991 and sold in 2004. Located near the junction of North Carolina 274 and North Carolina 182, this abandoned school complex had been sitting empty for years, but investigators clearly believed it might hold the key to finally solving Asha Degree's disappearance. As many as 30 officers were on the scene that day, methodically searching through 3 separate buildings on the property. Every inch was being scrutinized for evidence that could definitively connect the Deadmans to Asha's fate. The scale of this operation suggested that law enforcement had developed specific intelligence about this location and what might be found there. The timing of this search, coming after the DNA evidence, the cell phone warrants, and the witness testimony, indicates that investigators believe they finally have enough pieces of the puzzle to solve this case conclusively. For 25 years, the Dedman family maintained their silence about what happened that February night. They watched as Asha's parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, suffered through decades of not knowing what happened to their beloved daughter. They remained quiet as the community organized massive searches, held candlelight vigils, and never stopped hoping that Asha would somehow come home. They stayed silent while investigators followed thousands of leads that went nowhere. They said nothing while other innocent people were questioned and investigated. They kept their secret while Asha's family endured the unbearable pain of not knowing whether their little girl was alive or dead, whether she was suffering somewhere or had found peace. But secrets, especially secrets involving the death of a child, have a way of eating at people from the inside. The text messages recovered from the family's phones show that the psychological weight of what they had done was taking its toll over the years. Family members were discussing their continued involvement in covering up the truth and their need for ongoing silence to avoid facing justice. And then there was that party, that moment when Lizzie Foster could no longer carry the burden alone. In her intoxicated state, overwhelmed by emotion and perhaps guilt, she finally spoke the words that would eventually change everything. "I killed Asha Degree." Even though her sister immediately tried to silence her, even though the family continued their cover-up for years afterward, the truth had finally been spoken aloud. And now, 25 years later, that moment of vulnerability is helping to bring justice for a little girl who deserved so much better. The witness who heard this confession demonstrates the power of coming forward, even years after the fact. His decision to finally report what he heard, combined with advancing DNA technology and persistent police work, is making it possible to solve a case that many people thought would never be resolved. Now, with DNA evidence definitively connecting the family to Asha's backpack, text messages suggesting ongoing involvement in covering up the crime, a witness who heard one family member confess to killing Asha, and the intensive search of property once owned by the family, law enforcement appears to believe they finally have enough evidence to bring charges in this case. For Harold and Aquila Degree, who have spent 25 years in the horrible limbo of not knowing what happened to their daughter, these developments represent the first real hope for answers they've had in decades. The pain of not knowing has been unbearable, but the possibility of finally learning the truth about Asha's fate offers a chance for some measure of closure and justice. The Dedman family, who thought they had successfully hidden their involvement for a quarter century, now faces the consequences of their actions and their silence. DNA evidence that didn't exist when the crime was committed has finally caught up with them. The secret that may have destroyed a little girl's life is about to destroy theirs as well. As this investigation continues to unfold and move toward what appears to be an inevitable resolution, one thing is absolutely clear. After 25 years of mystery, the truth about what happened to Asha Degree is finally coming to light. If this case has captivated you the way it's captivated millions of people around the world, and you want to be among the first to know when justice is finally served for Asha Degree, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on all notifications, because this story is about to reach its conclusion, and you won't want to miss a single moment of it. The little girl who walked into that storm and disappeared may have been silenced that February night in 2000, but she's finally about to get the justice she deserves. And when that moment comes, it will be a victory not just for her family, but for every person who never stopped believing that the truth would eventually emerge.